as Joe said, I'm Corinna Abesser, and I work for the British Geological Survey. And just for those who are not familiar with who we are, so we are a public sector research organization, and our responsibilities are to provide geoscience advice, provide and store data, as well as sort of undertake research in related to the geosciences, including sort of natural resources. And my role in the organization is to lead geothermal energy research, and that's across the whole spectrum, from the really low temperature shallow geothermal to deep systems. And as Joe said, I think my particular focus is on trying to progress geothermal energy development in the UK. So in this talk, really, it's a bit of a mix of two things. Sort of the first part will be looking at what we have in the UK in terms of resources, and a brief update of where we are with sort of installations. And then the second part, I'm going to share some of my insight as to what I think other countries have done to progress geothermal energy research, and then see what we could do in the UK. I'm not going to offer any solutions or specific suggestions. I just want to highlight the areas that I think we all need to think about together when we sort of talk about geothermal energy. And it'll be very much, on a lot of it will be sort of on the what needs to come from government, but also, what needs to come from industry. So starting with the geothermal resources. So just a brief definition. Geothermal energy is the energy stored in the form of heat beneath the surface of the earth. It's sort of distributed in rocks and soils. It's stored and distributed in the rocks and soils as heat, and it can be exploited using different systems. The systems that we use depend on the geological settings, and here on the right hand side you see a graph of various systems ranging from, on the left hand side, shallower systems that use ground source heat pumps, and on the right hand side sort of deep systems. And in case you can't see the scale, so the shallower systems here are shown up to sort of 500 meters, and the deep systems go down to 5 kilometers. These systems deliver heat at different temperatures, and so these sort of ground source heat pump systems and mine water energy systems deliver temperatures of 10 to 20 degrees. So in order to use that heat, we need a ground source heat pump. And in my talk, I will refer to all systems that use a ground source heat pump as shallow geothermal. And then the other systems where we can use the heat directly, like those I'm going to mention in a minute, they'll be deep geothermal systems, just so you kind of understand my quite simple terminology here, but it helps. I just want to keep it simple. Oops, no, wrong way. The other systems we find in the UK are sort of in sedimentary basins, and these are obstructing temperatures above sort of 60 degrees Celsius, and that's hot enough to feed directly into heating systems without needing a heat pump. So I sometimes call them direct use systems, but traditionally they're sort of hydrothermal systems where you pump water from depths and pass via a heat exchanger. The other systems we have in the UK are sort of within the granite plutones, and we call them sort of heat producing or radiothermal granites. The temperatures we get with those at 5 kilometers depth are high enough for power generation. So these systems can be used for both generating geothermal electricity as well as heating. Now, the UK is not traditionally it's not a geothermal country in the traditional sense. So it's part of the stable foreland of Europe. The last period of active volcanism was a few tens of million years ago. But we do have some geothermal springs here shown in the southwest of England, so and Wales, Cardiff, Bristol, Bath. and in the central England, in Matlock and Buxton. These are sort of associated with the carboniferous limestone, which I will mention again later on. In addition to these, so geology, the geological history of the UK has been sort of dominated by mountain building events, and notably sort of the Caledonian orogeny and the Variscan orogeny. And these events have created regions which are favorable for geothermal exploitation. And I've already mentioned the granites, which are sort of, intrusions that are like kind of which intruded as part of these during these events into the subsurface, and are generally hotter than many of the rocks surrounding them, simply because of their chemistry and the fact that they have high content of radioactive elements that decay and produce heat. The other sort of geological setting that these orogeny or mountain building phases created are sedimentary basins, which formed all over the UK during different geological times. Most noticeable are the basins of Permo-Triassic age, so they're highlighted here in yellow, and you see them sort of in Northern Ireland, East Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, down here in the Wessex Basin, Worcester, Cheshire, as well as sort of West Lancashire, so all around the country. And I mention these because the sandstones within these basins are the major low enthalpy or geothermal reservoir we have in the UK. The carboniferous basins are also of importance, and they're shown here in blue. And they're important for two reasons. One, first, because they contain the carboniferous limestone, which I said already hosts the geothermal systems that we see at surface, but also because they hold the coal measures, which were mined extensively for coal, over the past. In the past, and they left behind large anthropogenic aquifers, which we can now utilize for geothermal heating. And so, just to show you where the coal fields are in the UK, so they're sort of little, mining symbols all around. So this is what the geology has provided. So now looking at the systems a bit more closely, so I already mentioned shallow and deep. So looking at the shallow resources, these tend to be low temperature, so 10 to 20 degrees, and require use of a heat pump. Ground source heat pump systems have such flexible designs, they tend to be applicable almost everywhere in the UK. And so to illustrate this, I've just provided a map here on the left that shows what the estimated temperature is at 100 meters depth. Which is the typical depth that these systems penetrate to, or deeper. But so you see, you can deploy them almost everywhere in the UK. The design needs to account for the different subsurface temperatures, but that's not usually a problem. The map in the middle and to the right shows the distribution of coal fields and mining districts. And I've already said that these are attractive because of the vast, so these sort of abundant mines are attractive because of the vast amount of water they hold. So the rock or the coal has been removed and has been replaced by water after the mines close. So this is the resource that mine energy systems going to tap into. And for the diffuse coal mine aquifers in Great Britain, it's estimated that these systems hold about 8,000 petajoules of heat. And that's about 6 times the annual demand for space heating and hot water in the UK, just for a reference. How are we doing in terms of using these resources? So on the left here is a plot of the ground source heat pump systems that are currently installed in Great Britain. I don't have Northern Ireland data, unfortunately, for that. And this is the little square shower is a 12-kilometer square, and it shows the systems per square. It's a bit difficult to read the legend, but the dark blue is 6 to 10 systems, and it goes to black. So red is 200 to 500, and then the black, which is only really around London, is greater than 500. Although I'm not even sure there is a black. It's hard to see anyway. Just to give you an idea, so just to confirm what I said earlier, these systems are everywhere, and currently we estimate that there's 47,000 systems installed all across the UK. The central plot shows the mine water systems, mine water geothermal systems that currently are in operation. It's only 4, but there are many, many more at different stages of development. I'd also like to highlight the research infrastructure, geothermal research infrastructure that exists in the UK, called sort of UK Geo Observatories, or UK Geos in short. And there's one system that is sort of installed into an abandoned mine water system, abandoned mine system. So you can research sort of mine water geothermal aspects there. And there's 2 systems which are in Cheshire and in Cardiff, which are the installations are sort of set out to enable research on aquifer geothermal storage, open loop and closed loop systems. And we have a city-wide observatory in Cardiff, which allows sort of research of city-wide impact of these systems. This is an illustration just to show you what sort of a mine water geothermal system looks like. The one on the right here is Lancaster Wines in northern England, and it's got a total capacity of 4 megawatt, and the heat is used for heating wine warehouses, so very noble use in my view. There is, and I can't see my reading here, yeah, so there's another 42 planned mine energy projects, and in addition to providing heat, they also have they will employment to the area and the wider UK. My next slide is on sort of geothermal heat pumps, and I've already spoken about them, saying they're applicable almost everywhere. The cost benefits of installing those in the individual homes is debated, but there is a definite role for these systems in supplying heat to blocks of houses, or as part of sort of ambient heat networks, or to sort of integrated energy networks where there is other sources, and especially when there is a heat and cold storage component, these systems are very valuable. I've already mentioned the research infrastructure, and just a few pictures here. So Glasgow is the one on the left here, where you can, that's set out to investigate mine energy systems, and that's about to be commissioned imminently, so will open for research access very soon. Cheshire is being developed, and again, currently it's a car park, although I think it has moved on since that photo was taken, and there is now sort of groundworks have started on that system. And Cardiff is just is a 61 monitoring sites all around the city, as well as an instrumented ground source heat pump to look at detail as to how that impacts the efficiencies of the system and the interaction with the subsurface. Moving on to the UK deep geothermal resources. So here's a map of the sedimentary basins, and the yellow ones are the Permo-Triassic basins shown here in Northern Ireland, and then all across Great Britain on this plot here. The high heat flow granites are shown here in red, and on the right hand side here for Scotland. And this plot here is another sedimentary basins of Devonian age, and the blue ones are Carboniferous basins. There is a table shown here which kind of estimates the heat that is contained within these different basins, and altogether it's estimated that there are 330 petajoules of heat available. And again, to give you a reference, that's about more than 200 years of UK heat supply for domestic space heating and hot water. The power potential that we estimate is really huge, but it assumes the number I've given here assumes that we can drill economically to 9.5 kilometers depth. At present, that's not possible. So the actual potential we can access with current technologies is considerably lower, but still 2,280 megawatts, which is, considerable. If you think that the power stations at sort of Petershead, Hunterston, and Torrenston have about 1,200 to 1,300 megawatts. We have 2 power projects that are currently being developed in Cornwall, the United Down and the Eden Geothermal Project. One of them has the deepest well on UK ground, and the other one the longest. So they're both sort of holding records in terms of drilling deep wells in the UK. The Eden Geothermal has yet to drill its second well, but it's currently getting ready to provide heat for the grow domes of the Eden project. Eventually, Eden will drill a second well, and then it will be a power and heat project, the same as United Downs will be once it's all set up and ready. So these are, not at the operational stage yet, but at various steps along the road. Perhaps less known is that the UK also has a deep geothermal heating scheme in the Wessex Basin in Southampton. The scheme has been operational since 1987 and is part of a combined heat and power sort of district scheme, which provides, which supplies 3,000 homes, 10 schools, and a number of commercial buildings. The overall geothermal distribution to that scheme is quite small, but according to the operators, the scheme throughout its lifetime has saved 130,000 tons of carbon dioxide, despite being quite small. I'll let you to sort of read the numbers yourself. I'm happy to share the slides afterwards if someone wants it as a record. So this is where we are with geothermal in the UK at present. So in my role as head of geothermal, and over the past years, I've become quite interested in understanding what is needed to build a successful geothermal market in the UK. And as part of this, I've talked to many colleagues in different countries across Europe, specifically those where geothermal is further advanced. And I've started compiling information on the different policies and regulations related to geothermal energy in these countries. So in the second part of my talk, I just want to look at, I will focus at what measures I have identified as the ones as contributing to building geothermal markets and unlocking geothermal potential. And to start, we're going to look at this table here. And there, and there are sort of different, there are sort of different categories. I've split it into different categories. The first one on top is sort of looking at the geothermal vision and the strategy, and that's really sort of the signaling that comes from government or from local or national governments about geothermal and what aims and goals they want to achieve. And we see that the countries I've chosen here all have some sort of strategy as to how they want to develop geothermal energy. And perhaps just to say, I've chosen countries deliberately that have, in my view, good geothermal market, but also that are quite similar in terms of geology. So I'm not comparing ourselves to Iceland, but to countries that are very similar in terms of the geology. The other aspect I looked at is sort of what sort of data are available publicly and how are data handled. So one thing I've seen is that all the countries listed here have a way of delivering data open access and providing estimates of the resource to interested stakeholders like planners or developers. They also have a data sharing obligation, except for France, where I couldn't find any information on that, which means that anyone who gathers geological data has to make them available either as part of either through a law or either because there has been a law change that requires that, or because it's a condition of the licensing agreements that they have for operating schemes. There's also, I've looked at sort of different policies and regulations in the countries, and I tried to group them a bit. And one important aspect is, how is geothermal energy defined? And in the 3 countries that I've listed here, geothermal energy is defined as a natural resource, and I will explain later why that's important. And they have licensing and permitting. There is policy support for in various ways that I've listed here. So SGE is shallow geothermal and DGE is deep geothermal. So where SGE and DGE is listed, that exists for that particular technology, but not for the other. Also looked at sort of funding for research and innovation, and again, what technologies that is available. And one of the points here is whether countries are some members of a EU project called Geothermica and or have access to EU funding. Now, if you put the UK against that, we see that there is sort of geothermal strategies being developed in Northern Ireland, that we have some support for some grants for shallow geothermal systems in the UK. Research and development funding is available but small, and the Geothermica membership is only really applicable to Scotland, but the rest of the UK can still bid into EU projects for the time being. So to unpack this a bit, I think I'm planning to go through the kind of 4 stages as the steps on the pathway to unlocking geothermal energy. And as the first one, I want to look at the geothermal vision, and here are sort of extracts from sort of government documents from the sort of devolved government and the UK government, sort of important strategy documents, and found that geothermal mention is quite rare, but encouragingly it is mentioned in the energy strategy for Northern Ireland. It has a mention in the heat and building strategy of the published by the UK government, albeit a bit on the not as a main entry amongst many others. And I mean, I couldn't find any mention in the Scotland heat and building strategy, but there is a mention of heat pumps, which is encouraging. I'd also like to say that since these strategies have been published, there have been some more attention given to geothermal energy, and this is the top sort of lines are taken from a document that was produced by the 1922 Backbench Committee, and that was looking at the opportunities that deep geothermal and mine water heat offer, and a document was produced as an advisory document to government from that committee. And so here you see that they do recognize the opportunity that deep geothermal and mine water geothermal provide, and later in the document they also recommend what needs to be done to help it along the way. This isn't a strategy document, this is a recommendation, and similarly there is an ongoing inquiry from the Environmental Audit Committee on technology on geothermal technologies, and there has been a lot of people, probably including many of the listeners, have submitted evidence to that, and there was an evidence session, an oral evidence session, and we're just now waiting for the report to come out. And again, that will be recommendation to government, and hopefully it will at some point be weaved into like a geothermal vision, which then can become a strategy. And what I mean by this is that if I've taken the example from the Netherlands here, who have a master plan for geothermal energy, and this defines sort of the resource and the ambition that the government has, as well as sort of a number of technical action plans to support achieving this target. I've sort of taken the different points here, and you can see that it includes many of the aspects I've sort of mentioned when I looked through the different countries and what sort of policies and data sharing agreements they have. So I think that it's quite clear from this that a lot of the other things need to be put in place in order for a strategy to be developed. But I think a vision can be there right at the start, and the vision could be that we want to, we recognize the value of that geothermal energy could bring, and we want to progress it. And I think, so the Dutch have been quite detailed in their what they want to achieve by when, and they have put policies behind it to help it along. As part of what the UK needs to do is, I think we need to understand what resources we have available in order to define a realistic target. Most of the knowledge that we have on resources that comes from BGS research that was undertaken in the 1980s, funded by the then UK Department of Energy and by the European Union. I think we have, as I showed you earlier, we have a good understanding of what resources are, but technologies have improved since then. And I think in order to get a more detailed understanding where the resources are available, we do need new data being collected. And an example here again from the Netherlands, where the Dutch government has commissioned a project called SCAN. So it's a seismic campaign of the deep subsurface, where the aim was to fill in the gaps in the deep subsurface map, where they haven't had any data from previous oil and gas exploration. Similarly, in the city of Munich, which has a lot of operational geothermal schemes, the Ministry for Economics and Energy has funded 3D seismic surveys, geological modeling, and numerical modeling in order to characterize the geothermal reservoir. And I think such investments are, and sort of getting data and understanding of the reserves are very important if you want to progress the industry. Another important aspect of data is that all data should be available publicly, and ideally sort of in the form of tools and kind of formats that are useful for planners and for industry. And here I'm pulling out the example again from the Dutch ThermoGIS tool, which shows you where resources are, the likelihood, the probability of the estimate, as well as sort of various variables related to depth of the resource and estimated heat and all of this. I've included a quote here also that, of the importance of publicly available data, as kind of pointed out by the chairman of the Dutch Geothermal sort of Association that's driving the development of geothermal in the country. I mean, data availability and accessibility has been mentioned in the previous webinar by Mark Island, and I would sort of fully support of what he said there. Data that are available in the UK are not necessarily accessible, and that includes the data that BGS holds. And I think we are working on it. However, I think it also includes the data that industry holds, and as we've seen with the countries I've been sort of looking at, data sharing across all sources, including industry, is a very important aspect, because you get just a better and bigger picture of what your resources, what the uncertainties are, and these should be made available through tools like similar to the one that the Netherlands have. Another important aspect I would highlight is our demonstrators. So different countries have started their geothermal journeys quite differently. So in Germany, so in Bavaria, it was an oil well that was found to contain warm water. While in the Netherlands, it was the horticulture entrepreneurs who got fed up with paying high gas bills. And so in any case, these first schemes that they created carried the highest risk, but they were, they provided the demonstrators that got the industry off the ground. They highlighted not only the technical viability of the approach, but also demonstrated the business case and the cost. And if you look at the quote that I included here at the bottom of my slide, this is taken from the UK government's heat and building strategy, and it kind of summarizes the dilemma that we are in that government wants to know the numbers first and how cost effective the technology is before it supports it. So it is a bit chicken and egg, because if no one steps forward to take the risk, then we're not going to get these numbers. And we have developments in Cornwall, which I hopefully will provide some of these numbers. But I'm also really glad to see that the Northern Irish government is stepping forward and offering funding to support demonstrators for shallow and deep geothermal. Now I'm going to move on now to from data to another aspect that needs to be looked at in the UK, which is how is geothermal energy defined in legislation. So at present, geothermal energy is not recognized as a natural resource anywhere in the UK, and therefore it's not licensed, and there's also no authority who has a remit for managing it. Licensing generally is seen as providing confidence to investors and operators by providing clarity on ownership and conditions of use, and as well sort of for how long they can use the resource. But it also enables regulators to clarify how they want the resource, under what conditions they want the resource to be used, including how do they want it monitored, reporting, requirements for decommissioning, as well as sort of you could put additional conditions of how you want to engage the public, deliver social values, and possible you could also define data sharing obligations. So I think there is great value, and in my view, it is a requirement that we get geothermal recognized, as a natural resource that can be licensed and regulated. The other important aspect is sort of policy support, and then I like this quote of one previous member of UK Parliament that I gathered when I worked at the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology, and it said it's not geothermal who needs to wash its face, but policy has created a patently uneven playing field. And just to back this up, there currently is no support available for geothermal heating systems of more than 45 kilowatts capacity, unless they're part of a heat network. And I think that creates a real gap. It is putting off development of the resource, because really there is no other way of doing it unless you have some support from policy or some grant. So one of the main difficulties that geothermal projects have are the large upfront costs, as well as the gap between sort of the investment and the return. There's also, and this is illustrated here on the right-hand side, there's also a high initial risk associated with drilling of the first well in particular, especially when sort of the temperatures at depth and the flow conditions are unknown. So in order to support geothermal development in the UK during this sort of very early market stages, there needs to be policies that provide upfront grants or risk guarantees in order to sort of reduce the gap between investment and return, and to share the financial risk associated with the development. And this is particularly important during early stages of the market. What has been seen in other countries is that once the resource is proven, once the technology is understood, and once a few systems have been put in place, then the market will take over, and there's much less support needed from government. So moving on to my next slide, I've also been looking at what's needed in terms of investment in research and innovation. The UK government, through sort of its research councils, has provided some support for deep drilling projects, as well as for the installation of the research infrastructure that I showed earlier. However, one of the main aims that research and innovation should have for geothermal is to reduce the cost, as well as the cost, risk, and environmental impact. Because that's, especially for drilling and well testing, which costs up to 65% of the whole project. So if we can focus on reducing costs for drilling, then that will kind of enable more projects to go ahead, because the overall costs will be hugely reduced, and therefore projects will become more viable. There's also other ways of kind of improving the economic case for geothermal, and it is through new technologies, and we see these include sort of new ways of harvesting geothermal energy from areas where previously you couldn't get to or get heat from the rock, but also for co-producing minerals from geothermal fluids. And I think really what research and innovation will do, in addition to cost reduction, it will also kind of over time increase the geothermal reserve. And sort of, just for those who not played it, the reserve is the portion of the resource that can be recovered economically at present time using existing technology. And I think I've got it. So there's an animation somewhere. Yeah, so because as drilling costs reduce, you can drill deeper economically, and therefore the reserve will increase. And similarly, with new technologies accessing areas that previously weren't considered feasible for geothermal, we sort of also increase the resource to some degree. And with this, I've sort of already arrived at the end of my presentation. And so I've provided a summary here of what I've discussed. The one aspect I haven't really touched on is the social license to operate. And that is the responsibility of all involved. I do think there is an onus on the industry to obtain that license, but also on the public in a way to grant it, because geothermal energy, we don't have an alternative than use what we can't use oil and gas anymore. So we do need to look at new technologies. They come with a different set of things to get used to. And so I think social license is important, but it is the responsibility of all. And I want to conclude with one final slide, because I have been sort of presenting this as if it was a tick box where we tick off things one after the other. In reality, the pathway to unlocking geothermal energy is not linear, and it should be, I imagine it more like a rail bridge, where sort of main strands of work run in parallel with sort of cross connections, and then points at which the work strands meet to assess the outcomes, evaluate progress, and define the next steps for in our geothermal journey. And with that, I'm finished, and I just want to draw your attention to that post brief that is available on the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology website, if anyone's interested to read up more on geothermal energy in the UK. Thank you.